Thank you. Okay. Yeah, Steve, I got your message. Okay. Sally. So let's go ahead and begin. Good morning, Ed Paynes. I noticed you had a name change in the bulletin the other day.
I did?
Yeah, it's Payne.
Oh, I didn't see that. I didn't see the bulletin. Must be
Well,
somebody else.
I think it might be in the newsletter. Anyway.
Oh.
So
in light of the season with the stock show, he took his wife to the rodeo, and one of the exhibits was that of breeding bulls. So they went up to the first pen, and there was a sign that said, "This bull made it 50 times last year." Jean's wife poked her husband in the ribs and said, "He made it 50 times last year." They walked a little further and saw another pen with a sign that said, "This bull made it 120 times." The wife hit her husband and said, "That's more than twice a week. You could learn a lot from him." They walked further, and a third pen, the bull sign said, "This bull made it 365 times last year." The wife got really excited and said, "That's once a day. You could really learn something from this one." The husband looked at her and said, "Go up and ask him if it was the same cow."
Oh. Ooh.
Oh, is right. I think I'll stop recording and restart the recording again.
Well, then maybe I better not tell the next one.
No, I think you ought to, but you should realize that you are cutting in and out.
You know, I think it's my internet, because that's what happened last week too. I was in and out.
Okay.
Rob staggers into an emergency room with a concussion, multiple bruises, 2 black eyes, and 5 iron wrapped around his neck. Naturally, the doctor asked him what happened. Well, Rob says, "It's like this. I was playing a quiet round of golf with my wife. When at a difficult hole, we both sliced the balls. We went to look for them, and while I was rooting around, I noticed one of the cows had something white on its rear end. I walked over and lifted up the tail. Sure enough, there was a golf ball with my wife's monogram on it, stuck right in the middle of the cow's butt. That's when I made my big mistake." "What did you do?" the doctor asked. Rob says, "I lifted the cow's tail, yelled to my wife, 'This looks like yours.' I don't remember anything after that." All right, I got one more.
Oh, good.
Actually, I should have sent this to Gary to post on his Facebook page. A local man addicted to brake fluid says he can stop anytime he wants.
Yeah.
Did you get it all?
Oh.
You broke up there, but I think we get the gist of it.
A local man addicted to brake fluid says he can stop anytime he wants.
Yes.
Yeah. Don't say it again.
It didn't get any better. Thanks, Ed. Carol, you got anything from up north?
That's pretty hard to follow like that, but there's this is kind of a football thing. Coach told Ole we're short on players. Do you think we can pass this football? Yeah, Coach, I think I can if I can swallow it. We know a Swede in that town that's a real go-getter. His wife has a steady job. At quitting time, the Swede will go get her.
Okay.
Let's see here. Yeah, I think that's probably about all that I didn't come
Okay.
up with today, so.
Good. Thanks. Appreciate it, Carol. Before I bring on Laura Jean or Laura Jean,
Yeah, Lord G.
Laura Jean, for our devotions, I'm going to make an appeal that next week Jim Garrett is on for devotions, and then we have a gap until March 1st when Dale Peterson has signed up. So I'm going to appeal to some of you to let me know when you can handle devotions and lead the Lord's Prayer. So otherwise we'll start going potluck. Mr. Anderson.
Yes, heavy on the Mr. By the way, I also will I'll be see if I can be in touch from Arizona the next couple weeks after this. See, as long as it doesn't get in the way of the tea time.
Which is good.
And ran into or read a very interesting, timely in the sense of all the disasters here we've had in the last, the fire, specifically up in Boulder County and all the other things, and also ties into the Psalm 78 that we'll be talking about today. And it's entitled Praise in the Darkness. It talks about Job. Then Job arose and tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshiped. And he said, naked I come from my mother's womb, naked shall I return. The Lord gives and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the nature of the, blessed in the name of the Lord. In all the Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong. Job is perhaps the greatest biblical example of endurance in hardship. Despite being a blessed and upright man, in one day he experienced the death of his children, the loss of nearly all his possessions, yet one of his first reactions was to acknowledge God's sovereignty, both in plenty and in poverty, in bringing joyful circumstance and in bringing grievous ones. As chaos, disappointment, and gain descend upon him, pain descend upon him. He shaved his head, put it on his robe, and fell on the ground, and only in anguish, but also in worship. Remarkably, in the darkness of this pain, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Instead, in his tears, he trusted in God's providence. In other words, he recognized that God knows what he is doing in every circumstance. God is worthy of our praise, even in the hardest situations. Job knew that his times were in God's hand. Dear Lord, thank you for the reminder that we are God's children, that despite our questioning, God does know what he's doing. And may we keep the faith in all of this. Amen.
Thank you, Gene. Well, in the absence of Arnie, he asked us to read Psalm 78, and then each person put together a 25-word statement on what they heard out of the psalm. I don't know if anybody, I put down a bunch of notes from what I read in that, but I'd like to, I think, go around and see what people thought of the reading. So it's a fairly long psalm, and rather than read it now, why don't we just take a few comments of what they read into that, and then we'll go around and maybe talk about what's your 25-word statement look like. Unless somebody else has a better idea, I'm completely open to that.
This is Ed. I'll try to go first. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. I'm breaking up pretty bad.
Okay.
I wrote down, God wants his servants to pass down his word from generation to generation, but his people disobey his word over and over again. So God retaliated. In the end, he retaliated. He gave him lots of chances in between, but then in the end, he seemed to retaliate.
Comments?
What I got out of it was pretty much along the same lines as Ed. I've been reading through the Bible. I started a while back, and I'm just coming up to the end of Second Kings. And First and Second Kings just repeatedly tells how the people were stiff-necked and the kings were stiff-necked and did not worship God as he had asked, and violated the precepts that he'd laid down for them time after time after time, until he actually split the kingdom of David and Solomon into two, Israel and Judah. And Judah tended to be more faithful to him than Israel, and he finally had the Assyrians come in and take Israel out and deport them because they had been so egregiously against his will. But in addition to what Ed said, you get down to those last verses, and you see that the Lord awoke us from a sleep and beat back his enemies, and he put them to shame. He rejected the tents of Joseph and Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah. And so there's that hope that even though he saw that he was rejected by much of the descendants of Abraham, there still was that faithful remnant, and he held on to that remnant, just as he holds on to all of us.
I looked reading this, and it's God's people continually forgetting the history of God, and thinking of it came to my mind, there's sort of a correlation to what's going on in this country now. We are losing in our schools and stuff, sort of being children actually being, I don't know if it's forgetting, but they're being, not being taught the history, tearing down the statues, not being taught civics like we were, citizenship. And it's just it's like it's being deliberately, and it is, I think, deliberately being neglected and forgotten. And we forget what God has done in this country, how this country was formed. And I see a correlation there, sort of when I was reading this psalm.
I'll go.
little bit, excuse me, go ahead.
Okay, I wrote down that it looked to me like the God of the Old Testament appears to be powerful, punishing, angry, harsh, callous, jealous, almost as if he were, in many ways, I likened him to a parent trying to teach his children how to grow up. But the dichotomy of it is, we think of the dichotomy of how Jesus taught love in the New Testament, but if we go to Psalm 103, verse 8, the Old Testament also refers to God as merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. So even in the harshest of the times that God put on the Jewish people, they still recognize that the grace is there.
It struck me today when I was reading it that for those of us who can remember our teenage years and have had teenagers of our own and even our grand teenagers, at least in a lot of our cases, the phrase that kept coming through loud and clear as I remember my parents is, they loved us. They may not like me today or like what I did, but there was never a doubt in my mind that my parents loved me. And that to me is the message that I see here in God's love.
I agree with all of those statements. In addition, the image that came to me when I read, especially the earlier part of the psalm, is that just like the sea, the tide or the waves even, they come onto the shore and they retreat. They come onto the shore and retreat, back and forth, back and forth. And it's like we're the sea, we're the volatile part, and God is the rock, He's the earth, He's the shore. And we come into His presence and then we retreat and kind of fall away individually and as a church and as a nation. Then we come back in closer to God, then we kind of fall away over time. And it's just as periodic today as it was with the ancient Israelites. Human nature just is variable that way. Just, follow our own instincts, follow our own desires, follow our own intentions. And just like coming to church on a regular basis revives the God part of that, and the rest of the week tries to steal it away again. Or the morning devotions, day by day, come to God in the morning, or whatever time the devotions are, and the rest of the day tries to pull you back away from God again. It's just the way of the world, it's the way of human nature. And I like the way that Mr. Florida there put it. God is gracious in the end. He's patient beyond understanding, and it's a good thing. He's more patient with me than I am with my own kids and grandkids. And it is a dichotomy, but it is human nature. And I, for one, need to realize that I pull away all the time. But I've got to find ways to get back to Him. And, habits like church going or daily devotions or Bible reading or talking to spiritual friends, whatever brings the juices back, is the way that I reconnect with, who I need to be, not what I've become over time, but who I need to be. I'm still working on that. Anyway, that's the analogy that came to me, was the constant motion of the waves.
Yeah, I think whenever things get good, people tend to say, don't really need God, I can do it myself. And then when things get bad, there's more of a tendency to turn back to God. Does God still send plagues and things like that? I don't know, but I suppose there are certainly people that would suggests that things like COVID could be something that God might send to us to wake us up. I have no idea if that would be true of God, but certainly in the Old Testament, God used that kind of a thing to wake people up.
I would agree with that.
In my statement, I wrote, God continues to love us even though we provoke his anger and fail to acknowledge all he has done for us. For me, it breaks down into two subjects here. One is the nature of the relationship. The other is the agenda or the behavior. And as we read through 78, I think it's clear that the relationship is one thing. The relationship is the sustaining part. The short term is the behavior that comes in that relationship, and that's like the connection to the condition between parent and child. That relationship will always be that relationship. What's going on between the parties is secondary to that. And for us to try to think in the long term and think about where this leads us in the long term, it's the relationship that is the critical subject here. And I think that trust that God will be there in spite of how seriously the breakdown is in the behavior, that's a long-term lesson.
I didn't really write anything down, to be honest, but when I read through this scripture, it just struck me how patient, God was with his people, and how he was really being tested, almost by by the Jewish people, and he he never gave up. I mean, he punished them, but I think towards the middle of the psalm there was a one of the verses said that God realized, hey, these it's a sinful world and people are by nature sinful. So it's almost like I kind of took it like God kind of took a step back and realized this is going to happen, and I don't know, it was quite a very involved psalm. And I'm wondering, I was going to ask Arnie about this, and obviously he isn't able to be here with us. Was there a part of when the tribes were wandering in the wilderness? Didn't God wait to allow them to get to the promised land until an entire generation had been no longer there? And do you see where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah, and in fact, he didn't even allow Moses to cross over the Jordan because of an act of disobedience on Moses' part. But he kept them wandering for 40 years in order to have one complete generation die out and not realize his promise.
Carol, do you have any observations?
I did not spend a lot of time with it, so I really don't have anything to offer at this point.
Okay. Well, my comments were this. I wrote a whole page of observations while reading this thing. There's very clearly a generational theme through this. Trust in God, keep his commands, and then they wouldn't keep his covenants, live by his laws. And then throughout through the miracles, there were those that would rebel, then they'd put God to the test. And what I had written is God was upset. And then as this went on, God was pissed. And yet he gave them manna and to eat and water to drink. Still, they didn't worship God, and he was angry. So if you remember from your geometry, I think it was a sine wave. You know, I saw that it was a sine wave of irritation, being taken care of, rejection. God's mad. And then they return to God. They become unfaithful. God forgives them, restrains his anger, rejection, and repeat. And then the end ends up with a path for David to lead them. So that's kind of what I saw is a repeated irritation, disobedience, return to the faithfulness, become unfaithful. You know, just kind of it just kept going like that. But that was the image that I had in that.
One of the questions I had at the end of the Psalm said David came in and got everything straightened out, made me wonder if David wrote the Psalm.
Comments?
Yeah, given the history of David, he just seems to have sinned himself. And yet God chose him.
I see this kind of as a way of life that in today's age, you know, if we believe everything that was in the news, we're going to hell in a handbasket. And then there are a few of those important resurrection type things that will come out. So it's, yeah, we try our best, we fail, God picks us up, we try again, we fail, and so and life goes on.
I think some of the comments that have been made in reference to God treating the people of Israel as though he were their parent and they were his children kind of reminded me of the statement that I've heard a lot of times over the years in this class of saying to kids or grandkids, I love you, but I don't really like you much right now.
Grover, that is an accurate statement for those of us that have kids or grandkids.
Yeah.
I think I fixed my breaking up problem. I plugged in a wire instead of using wireless, and I think it's working better. I thought it was interesting. Verse 50 says, he prepared a path for his anger. He did not spare them from death, but gave them over to the plague. And I got confused when I first read that. I said, well, he didn't spare them from death. But I didn't understand, well, then why did he give them over to the plague if they were dead? But I think what it meant is that he gave them over to the plague, and then if death came, then it was the cause of of the death was the plague, I think is what I read into that, but I was confused when I first read that.
Hmm.
So he didn't kill him directly, he just let the plague run its course.
And of course, verse 46, coming from an agricultural background, has anybody ever seen a swarm of grasshoppers in a field?
Mhm,
Yeah, it's amazing.
mhm.
There aren't enough birds to eat them.
A friend of mine that I worked with up in Boulder, he lived in Boulder and he had some land back there and he always had a big garden. And every year he always bought a couple ducks. And it was funny to watch them on the tall grasses or on whatever. The grasshopper would be on one side and then one duck would come up and the grasshopper would move to the other side of the stalk. And then the second duck would come up and snatch it. It was amazing how that, he said, oh, you always have to have two ducks if you want to control the grasshoppers. And sure enough, it was just, I couldn't believe it, how they work together.
Reminds me of the analogy, we need to strengthen one another because it's tough life. And the sine wave that Rob talked about of life. I need reminders. I need you guys around me. I need people that bring me back to the good part of the sine wave. And so as the ducks were helping each other, I think we help each other. Good analogy. I like that.
I believe there's a proverb that addresses that two are better than one. Goes into a strand of a rope, one thread by itself, do more threads. I forget what that proverb is, but there's a proverb on it, I think. Do you suppose the God is still sends plagues? We have this COVID that we're doing now. There's a plague that God has sent on us. That seems to run in cycles also. Go back to the Spanish plague, the bubonic plague.
I don't know. I find that hard to believe because too many good, innocent people got affected by this COVID.
That's where we need a pastor to lead us on through that one. I've had some of that same conversation with other pastors over the years. I can never remember their response other than, what is it? The people would say, well, God doesn't let bad things happen to good people. And yet it does. It's not selective in that manner. But I heard that growing up a lot, but that was part of the Missouri Synod and farm background.
I think it goes back to Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
We made a choice back then to live the way we wanted to.
Yeah.
I think it goes back, and I agree with you, Ed. It's like we're born into a sinful world, and it's it's all around us, and we have to make some choices, and hopefully they're good choices. But sometimes we don't make good choices. But God's always there to offer forgiveness.
another thought I had was that I'm not sure whether God actually sends the plague as much as I know that's debatable in many ways, but the part I do pretty sure of is that God uses the negativity of that to bring us back to him. To a lot of people in that pandemic, you read the chit chat about the pastors talking about their congregations as an example, saying, yeah, we have fewer members, but the ones that come are somehow different. They run deeper now. They've grown closer to God through the pandemic. And I think each of us has a choice to make, including myself. Did I use that time, and am I still using that time to draw closer to God, or to just be despondent and go off and do my own thing and eat too much food or drink too much beer or whatever it is, as a way of handling the depression, rather than opening my Bible and say, you know what, I'm depressed, God, and do a little confession right there and say, you know, I need you in my life worse now than I ever did. And so just as the ebb and flow of life comes, my willingness to respond to God's plague, if you want to call it that, is my choice. And I think God certainly utilizes the bad things in my life as opportunities to send me little wake-up calls, or to have somebody say something to me or hear something in this Bible study that kind of spurs me back and invigorates my faith, and say, yeah, okay, I needed that right now. So I think it depends on how we respond, just like everything else in life. Some will respond, some will not. I read Ezekiel this morning when God sent him into the people in Babylon, all the people that were sent to Babylon. They vacated Jerusalem and sent them all to Babylon, and most of them, and they're all captives. And a lot of them were saying, well, this is just temporary, no big deal. We'll get to go back pretty soon. Ezekiel's message was, hey, our fathers and even some of us were pretty unfaithful back there. And that's the reason we're here in this mess. And until we come back to God and in our hearts, nothing's really going to change. And indeed, it was a whole generation before they got to go back. Well, that's just the ebb and the flows. And God warned Ezekiel, said some will listen to you, some will not. And so some people make advantage of the plague and some people do not. And of course, it's a mixed bag with me, I know that. But overall, what's the trend? You know, where am I headed? So whether or not God actually sent it doesn't really matter so much as what we do with it. That's what I'm thinking.
What does this say, this Psalm 78 say to us in our everyday lives now, 21st century?
Making the mistakes or leaving, putting God second, third, or even out of my life. I'm not the first believer to have left and come back, left or forgotten. But there's your sine wave analogy again. But I think so many times, and I think in our life, especially here, we're such an immediate need, and we have immediate access to the news. We have immediate access to so much. We forget that this is a journey. Not just a lifetime journey, but a soul's journey before and after. And to pick out our particular moment in time, this hour Bible study as the key is very human, but we just kind of overreact to the momentary crisis, as opposed to take advantage and really what's happened in our life over these decades.
For those of
I
us,
think, yeah, I think we're each given a life for a purpose. It's a spiritual journey. And can you hear me?
yep. Yeah, Steve Sally's just leaving us, so we were waving at him.
Oh,
Not waving at you. Just,
I thought Gary was waving me off like it was a bad approach to an aircraft carrier and I needed to go around.
okay,
But
so come back around.
I've already crashed. But I think this life journey is something that God gave us that has an agenda in it. We weren't given our life to be lived to show that we accomplished perfect attendance. There is a drama that comes for each of us, and that in that drama, how we deal with that drama is the source of awareness that comes to us in the living it through. So yes, I think God does allow trouble to come into our journey, that God doesn't necessarily invent the pandemic to cause us to die, but that God does allow tribulation to be part of what is our environment as we go through our spiritual journey, so that in the dealing with that is a source of discovery and a source of awareness about who we are in relationship to God.
I'll bring up a related, but maybe slightly different topic. So those of you that have children and grandchildren, or in some cases great grandchildren, when do you stop worrying about your children?
When I die.
Thanks a lot, Dale.
I've got a second Dale's comment. It's a journey as well. Or my brother-in-law said one day, he said he's watching his son and his young family making decisions regarding their life at the moment. And he said, I've been down that road. I know where they're going, but he said, they haven't asked.
That assumes that you wait for a question to respond. I can't wait that long. Yeah.
Rob, I just have to respond with the subject that's been brought up in this call many times about when we've tried everything and then we finally decide, okay, we're going to give it over to God. Well, you got to do the same thing with your kids. You got to hope that you've laid a good foundation and that they would, follow there on from there, and God would take over.
But I want to help.
That would be me.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of life experience in this group, and that's it's valuable to me. Well, since the time is moving on and seems to be hitting a stall point, let's move on to prayers for people, and I'll go ahead and lead on this one. Our dear daughter-in-law, Andy's, our oldest son's wife's mother, had frontal temporal dementia, which is a progressive, is a genetic disease, and it is a progressive disease. And we don't know exactly when that all started, but she refused to get vaccinated for the coronavirus, and ultimately died this last week of COVID. So it's kind of a combination where she had frontal temporal dementia, and would not allow anybody to give her a vaccination, and she died of COVID in the care facility that she was in down at Colorado Springs. So I want to, and we've already lifted up prayers to our daughter-in-law and her brother and the families. Pray for people to take care of themselves during this plague, this COVID, however long this thing lasts. Anybody else? Prayers of the people? Prayers of concerns?
I have something to throw out there. My youngest granddaughter, 12, she's been diagnosed as bipolar, and she's been on some medication. She's also autistic, high functioning, but autism basically means you don't interact with understand the world around you and how you're supposed to react to it. And her response, her and her brother both are that way, but her response is anger. His is just goes inward. But the key point here is that she's been without her medication for over 2 weeks because of the personnel shortage at the Walgreens. I guess it's not just their Walgreens, but it's a lot of Walgreens. And it's really causing, in this case, mental health issues to be worse. They think they finally have, just as of yesterday, get the medication to come through and start taking it again. But it's my son's family, and it's a tough life over there right now. And to make matters worse, they have a lot of issues around broken appliances. Like I said, the furnace wasn't running. Dishwasher they bought didn't work. This was scratch and dent that turned out to be used. So fraudulent there. And we had to spend a whole day taking it back and try to get a refund and getting another one. It was a mess. So they've had a lot of abnormal stress in the family. Prayers in their direction.
I'm going to give thanks for my old football coach, Rod Black. Little town of Danview, Minnesota is 500 people. He was born and raised in that town. In my older sister's graduating class, went to college, came back, started teaching and coaching football, basketball. Took 3 of his basketball teams to the state tournament from this little town. Just stayed on in the town, continued after he retired with the hospice board member and the developing the historical museum in the town, but very unusual, lay leader in his Methodist church. Just a very unusual situation where a guy would come and be that successful in a little town of 500 people and stay there until the day he died. And so I'm thankful for his life.
I want to just, was mentioned that dementia and Alzheimer's, ALS. I had a cousin that died from ALS just recently, but I have a cousin, Dickinson, North Dakota.
Mhm.
And they have a memory care facility there that where people with ALS or not ALS, Alzheimer's and dementia do. And I showed a video that took them out in did sledding with inner tubes and stuff with the people from the facility. They down the hill. They were just having a great time. And she just made the statement, and she said that it's too bad they won't remember it tomorrow. It's I also have a good young friend that has that frontal lobe affair, whatever they call it, dementia. I think I have a little dementia of myself quite often. I know I do. I forget names, forget what's going on. But also, I would ask that prayer be lifted up for my pastor friend, Pastor Franco with Iglesias de Cristo. A short while ago, his mom got real sick in Guatemala. He went back to Guatemala to be with her. She passed away. He got back here, and now his dad is in trouble, and he's on his way to Guatemala again to be with his dad. So lift up prayers for him. For myself, everything's going good. Outside of, like I said, my little dementia and stuff, I do remember to take my dog for walks, and life is doing well. God is good. Thank you.
I'm sure your dog reminds you, Leroy, that you need to go for a walk.
Absolutely. Just mention it, and all excitement breaks loose.
I found out yesterday that Nikki, our financial person at church, her family has acquired COVID, everybody except her so far. So keep her in your prayers.
I'd offer up prayers for the family of Roger and Bev Dahl. I saw where Bev just recently passed away. Roger was a longtime member of this Bible study. So prayers for them, their family.
Yeah.
It was a very nice service.
Yeah, Bev was a very positive, active, they both were as a husband and wife. The best description for those of you who know Randy Satram and Vicky, Randy said, yeah, the Dahls had a marvelous ability to issue their opinion on something going on with the mechanics of the church, but then to just let it be, not to grind it into dust, and just participate. You've got my opinion. You don't need anything more than that. And then they move on with their project within the church. But they were very, very positive people right up now to the loss of Bev.
This last fall, Dory and I were standing out after church service. Bev was telling us that her liver cancer was progressing and she was not going to treat it anymore. She said she'd had it and she was ready. So, that's kind of a tough realization to stand out there in our parking lot and admit that says, okay, I'm done with this life. I'm ready to go on. But that was Bev.
Yeah. And she wasn't looking for tears. She was just stating the fact.
No.
Well, she was quite the artist. I didn't realize that they displayed some of her artwork there. Well, a lot of her artwork there at the service. It was beautiful.
But she stayed busy both physically and mentally right up to the end. A good feature in that.
She was a big part of she would help us make sandwiches every month for the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good people. Carol, do you have any prayers you want to offer up?
No, just thankful for each day and for this group.
Very good. Grover?
Just would like to have prayers for my friend and lodge brother, Reverend Jim Harris, retired Methodist minister. He's continuing to fight a different type of Alzheimer's that's taking away his ability to walk, to some extent, his speech patterns. He's in an experimental program right now, and his doctor said that if this drug works, it may buy him 1 to 2 years. But otherwise, he's facing his end of life, and he's doing it with the typical bravery that I've gotten to expect from him. He's very matter of fact about what's going on in his life, but he has a very strong faith. But he's been the main support for his wife for the last 12 years as she's been battling cancer. And has had at least 3 to 4 surgeries every year for the last 4 years. So prayers for Reverend Jim, please.
Very good. Hey, Leroy, my doctor tells me that the forgetfulness is a natural part of aging. So hang on that.
I forgot what my doctor told me.
Well, before we close the Lord's Prayer, is there anything anybody else would like to bring up?
Yesterday, Barb and I were picking at each other because we're so afflicted by January and feeling like we can't do all the things we used to do. So we're just kind of taking it out on each other. So finally, we reached a desperate stage and said, well, let's go to McDonald's for lunch. And so we drive down to McDonald's for the 2 for $6, good deal, and pull into the next parking lot to eat our sandwiches. And I just happened to pull up in front of a green Ford Explorer. It's about 20 years old. And it occurred to me that the Explorer has been sitting there since last summer. And about that time, we're getting our sandwiches out and the rear door opens a little bit and all the windows are taped over so you can't see what's going on inside. And the lady gets out and she's got a big dog and the dog takes a poop and she gets her bag out and picks it up and then opens the door of the Explorer and she's fidgeting, and next thing we know, a guy gets out. So there's 3 of them living in that Ford Explorer. And we sit there with our sandwiches thinking, we really got it bad back home. And then the 2 embrace. And those 2 were so loving to each other. And she was so loving to the dog. And we're sitting there thinking, are we the kind of people that they're showing us they really are? We just branded them as homeless and dropouts out of society. They appear to have a better relationship than we do. We finished our sandwiches and drove away thinking, time we need to update our perception of a whole lot of things. We feel bad about the fact that these people are living in a Ford, and we have so much. How do we put into context what we have in each other? What is the value of our relationship? What is our obligation to these people? What are we really thinking about who these people really are? If we just branded them as dropouts when they have what looks to be a relationship that could teach us much about how to cope and be together. And I just thought to myself, who are the angels here? Time to wake up sometimes. And I pray for that couple and what they are and what their future is and what's to come and what's my relationship to them. But sometimes it's there's lessons all around us, and I pray to God that I can stay alert and be aware of all those lessons that come to us in our daily life.
That reminds me, 2-3 weeks ago, I think it was in the newspaper, said nowadays a luxury home costs $1 million. And I thought to myself, well, our home certainly isn't worth $1 million, but compared to the rest of the world, I certainly live in a luxury home.
Dale, that's quite the story that you were led to that place at that time in your life when you were having trouble. They say God works in mysterious ways.
Well, Gene, would you go ahead and lead us in the closing of the Lord's Prayer?
Thank you. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now and forever. Amen.
Thank you. And I would ask that please give some thought of volunteering for devotions and pass that over to me on a date that you can do that. Okay. And I would also thank Grover for the last couple of weeks of leading that. And Grover is going to be leading this in from February 15th on for about a month. You good for that, Grover? Very good. Go in peace. Serve the Lord. Thanks be to God, right?
Thanks be to God.